Okay, we're starting.
Okay, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes. Yes.
All right, we had 9 copies of this handout, so we may have more than 9 people. You might have to share. Does everybody have one of these?
April and I can share.
Yes.
Yes? And you can hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
If you can go to that, if you can go to that.
Right there?
Can we get
He's going to speak right into the microphone. The microphone's right here.
Alright, just so we can hear it.
Speak. You're going to speak up, right? Because it's recording me very well right now.
Yeah? Okay. Yes, I assume it can. Okay, so if you don't have one of these, I made 9 copies. Please share. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about today about cycles of time and consciousness. And the idea being that there is no time and there is no space, but when things occur in time and space, there can be eras of time that are what the Buddhists call propitious or advantageous. Advantageous. My teacher would say that he'd look at you and he'd say, you're all very lucky people to be incarnated in this era of inner transformation. And so a healthy part of this presentation is going to be on the Yugas and then on the Mayas. And the Yugas represent a cycle of time that is 26,000 years long. And according to the ancient teachings, there can be as many as 40,000 of these 26,000 year cycles in a single age. In a single
How many?
age. 40,000
Oh, wow.
of these 26,000 year cycles. And so I wanted to start you off with the very first slide that is an indication of our Earth that is tilted on its axis. So you know our Earth goes around the sun, but it's tilted at about 23.5 degrees as it goes around the sun. So right now, if the sun is here, it's playing a lovely tune.
Sorry about that.
If the sun is here and our Earth is tilted here, then in the northern hemisphere, we're experiencing more light because the axis of the Earth is tilted towards the sun. So as the Earth comes around the sun, the axis is still pointing in the same direction. So here would be fall, where the sun touches the equator and equal amounts of light at the north and south poles. And then when the Earth goes over here, now the northern hemisphere is much further away, and when we live on the northern hemisphere, we're facing this way, so the rays of the sun's light is not as strong. That's why the sun appears lower in the sky in the winter. Then when the Earth comes around here is spring, and when it comes around here is summer. Now we're closer, and the incidence rays of the sun are more straight overhead. So this is one solar year with 4 seasons, and the reason we have seasons is because of this tilt. If the Earth was like this, I don't think we'd be enjoying seasons of greater and lesser light on the Earth, but because it's tilted, it's also pointing at a star, which right now is Polaris, right at the tail of the Big Dipper. So when someone says, look there, there's Polaris, our axis of the Earth is pointing directly at Polaris. But it doesn't always point at Polaris. So over 26,000 years, imagine you have a top, and you spin the top, and you let it spin on a hard surface, and it's working beautifully. What eventually happens?
It wobbles.
It starts to go like this and move eccentrically. That's what the Earth is doing. That's what the Earth is doing. So because the Earth is now appearing to be stable as it points towards Polaris, the Earth is actually doing this on a 26,000 year cycle. It takes 26,000 years for the Earth to do this one wobble, which means that in 13,000 years, the Earth will point in the other direction, away from Polaris. So at different points in this 26,000 year wobble, our pole will point towards different stars as its northern star. So this first slide here is meant to show you how the Earth, during the equinoxes, passes through all 12 signs of the zodiac, where we experience 2,000 and so forth, so many years of a certain age. Why? Because if you take 12 signs of the zodiac and you divide 12 into 25,920, it's about 2,200 years and change per sign. So imagine the Earth is doing this thing, and on every equinox, here in the spring and here in the fall, it's pointing towards a certain sign in the zodiac over 26,000 years. So over that period of time, it will have pointed at all 12 signs of the zodiac. So this first chart is meant to show you that the Earth is not statically pointing towards Polaris all the time. And the reason why we use the term precession of the equinox is because when you look at the zodiac in this way, you always look across the zodiac. So if you look at, I want to go to, well, let's go to the next chart, because I'm going to flip back and forth, and I do want you to stop me from time to time and ask questions.
So are you saying that over this long period of time, 26,000 years, the North Star for the Earth changes?
Yes. In other words, think of the North Star as fixed where it is. And think of the wobble of the Earth going like this over 26,000 years and eventually pointing to Polaris again, but every 26,000 years.
Right.
And over this wobble, it will have pointed at its equinox at every sign in the zodiac, and each sign in the zodiac would last whatever 12 into 25,920 years is. So about 2,000 years.
2,160.
2,160 years. Thank you, Mr. Engineer. Appreciate it. That's great.
So every 2,100 and whatever years, our North, what we identify as our North Star will be a different star.
Well, not every 2,000 years.
Okay.
It means that right now Polaris is our North Star. And as our Earth goes through this wobble, it takes 26,000 years to go around once. It will have pointed through every sign of the zodiac, about 2,160 years.
But our North Star will always be Polaris through that period?
No, our North Star is Polaris right now.
That's what I mean. Okay.
And in 13,000 years, that Earth's wobble will be pointed opposite Polaris.
Right.
As you can see on page 1, that little circle that it inscribes on the top, to me it looks like in 13,000 years it's going to be pointed towards Vega. Can you see Vega on the top left of your slide there? So what that means to you and I is that in astrology, when certain bodies coincide, like a conjunction or a trine, we say that's very advantageous. When there's opposition, we say that's a challenge, that's a problem. And it has to do with the astral bodies like planets, stars, comets, galactic centers being living, not inert rocks, not inert balls of gas. And that every body has a consciousness. Like Jupiter has an influence, Saturn has an influence, Mercury has an influence, the Sun has an influence. So think of our sun and our Earth going around the sun, and as the Earth goes through this precession of the equinoxes, we go through different ages. And those ages represent cycles of consciousness. So if you, I'm going to flip back and forth.
And that's signs of the zodiac.
Yes, I'm going to flip back and forth just a little bit, and I'm happy to go over things. Yes?
So this is the dawning of the age of Aquarius?
Precisely.
Yeah.
Yes.
We are going.
Yes.
So the Earth is always wobbling.
Yes.
It's always moving, because like I had
Yes.
heard that we're in the wobble, which I thought meant that we weren't before, but it's always doing that.
And the actual angle of the wobble is also said to vary between 22 and 23.5 degrees. Right now it's 23.5 degrees. That's why you have these points on the Earth that are circumscribed around, above and below the equator at 23.5 degrees. the Tropic of Cancer, the Tropic of Capricorn, that when you have the longest day of the year, which was June 20th,
Yeah,
that the sun pointing at the earth was at this 23.5 degrees above the equator, right? That's as far north as it's going to go, which is interesting because if you live down in the Yucatan, the sun actually passes overhead. But here in the U.S., it never passes directly overhead because it doesn't go beyond 23.5 degrees.
yeah, we're not close
And
enough to
then
the equator.
at the equinox, it's directly over the equator, right? That's this point here. And then here in the fall, or the winter, it's 23.5 degrees below the equator. So that's why the sun appears to go above and below the equator, and the sun appears higher in the sky in the summer and lower in the sky in the winter. You had a comment?
At the equinox, it's, or I mean at the summer solstice, it's directly over the Tropic of Cancer, which is 23.5 degrees above the equator, as you said.
Yeah.
And in the winter, it's directly over the Tropic of Capricorn, which is 23.5 degrees south of.
Yep,
Right.
that's what it says.
So let's flip to this page.
Page 3.
Page 3.
Page 3.
What you're looking at is called a great year. It is 26,000 years long. And I believe it was Plato that called it the great year. What you're looking at is a 26,000 year cycle in the precession of the equinoxes, in the one wobble of the earth, if you like, and how it's looked at by 3 different cultures. So what you're looking at is a collage, how 3 different cultures looked at the very same 26,000 year cycle. The outer circle that says Golden Age, Silver Age, Bronze Age, Iron Age, those were terms used by the Greeks. And at the very bottom is the Iron Age. And at the bottom of this 13,000 year cycle was approximately, depending on who you talk to, 560 AD. Was the very bottom of consciousness, shall we say. And the way that these are constructed, even by all these 3 cultures, is that when you're coming down from the peak like this, you're in the descending stage, 13,000 years of descending in consciousness. When you reach the bottom, you start coming up in consciousness. Now, the inner ring, the silver-colored ring, was how the India culture looked at it. They called it the Satya Yuga, the Tretya Yuga, the Dwapara Yuga, and the Kali Yuga. But it was a different culture's name for the same thing. Okay, got it? 3 rings, 3 cultures looking at the same cycle. Just 3 different ways of looking at it. The golden ring is how astrologers see this. So if you look at the very bottom here, if you were to draw a line right at 6 o'clock down here on the bottom, and you look across, you'd be somewhere in between which 2 symbols up here? Which 2 astrological symbols? Aries and Pisces.
Aries and Pisces.
So at the bottom of the Kali Yuga, or the Iron Age, we were in between and just coming into the age of Pisces. Now, the reason why they call it the precession of the equinoxes is twofold. One is the equinox represents that point where the sun light is equal night and day on the planet. And precession means that when you look astrologically at a sign, you look across the zodiac. So imagine if you're coming down this way and you're looking across, then the zodiac appears to be marching backwards, where you would go through Taurus, then you would go through Aries, then you would go through Pisces, then you would go through
The next one.
the next-
Aquarius.
Aquarius.
That's what I was going to say. Aquarius. So that's why they call it precession, because it has the appearance of moving backwards because you're looking across the zodiac. So the reason why this is important is because it gives us a clue into the era of consciousness that we are entering now.
We're on the way back up.
We are on the ascending part of the Yugas and going into
Are we still in Kali Yuga?
No.
No.
apparently, if you look on page 2,
So Yuga means age?
Yuga means age. According to this author, apparently at 1698 AD, we entered into the Dwapara Yuga. It's very, very exciting because the idea of showing you what the Yugas represent as cycles of consciousness is to say that we are incarnated in different eras where different levels of consciousness are available to us to experience, should we decide to do the work. And so this entering into Dwapara from Kali means, Dwapara means the electrical age. So if you look around 1698 AD, we discovered electricity, magnetism, gravity. These were considered to be subtle forces because no one has ever seen magnetism, no one's ever seen electricity, no one's ever seen gravity. And to this day, we've never seen those forces. When you see a lightning bolt, that is the force of electricity causing the molecules to ionize and give off photons of light. But that's not the electricity, it's what it's causing, but it's not what it is. And so imagine 400 years ago, we discovered these forces because we were meant to. And very quickly after the discovery, we said, now wait a minute, these forces have always existed, right? Makes sense. Electricity has always existed, but only we became aware of its existence. So it was a point in space-time where our consciousness was meant to become aware of the subtle forces in the universe. And around 1917, 1920, Newtonian mechanics about how the universe works started to be questioned by quantum mechanics. That there were subtle forces that were not necessarily related to space and time, but still affected space and time. And now we come to today, 2017, where we have a great understanding about the spiritual nature of the human being, that we have chakras, that we have meridians, that we have a pranic or chi or a ki body that can actually be measured. And that science is now actively measuring the human biofield that is not a physical field, but is what is called non-local. The point is not that we're discovering, the point is that we are in an age of consciousness where it is intended that we know this. That we have the capacity and the capability to understand the subtle forces governing the universe itself. So this entry right here, if you look across, you can see that we're going from Pisces into Aquarius, the water bearer, but the air sign, right? The one that has to deal with these subtle forces. Does this make sense so far?
Mm-hmm.
So we're somewhere in the Dwapara. So how does it relate to across the graph over the Aquarius?
Okay, so if you start on page 2,
Yeah,
and you look at 1698 AD,
yeah,
and you take your pen and you draw straight across
yeah.
to the other side, you see
Okay,
you see
yeah.
Pisces, okay? And then if you see yourself moving in a clockwise fashion
Yeah,
in an ascending stage, you can see eventually it's going to move out of Pisces
yeah.
into the influence of Aquarius,
Okay.
okay? So if you go back several thousand years, when we were in the age of the Taurus, we were worshiping what? The bull. And then as we advanced into the next sign, we were worshiping the ram. And then the fishes, which was brought about by the Christ. You know, Christ was seen as the one who brought the idea of Pisces, or the fishes.
Oh.
Is there a question? So the thing is, one of the coolest things about this is that we spend more time in enlightened phases than we do in this kind of a bummer this kind of a bummer phase. That if you look at the distribution or the size of these rings, I think, is it on page 2? Yeah. If you look in the page 2 at the outer ring, it's actually, what, 9,600 years. We're in the golden age.
In 9,000 years.
Now.
What did you say?
Well,
Now?
from now, we only have to wait about 5,000 years.
Is that all?
So-
Oh, I got that.
But every age has its own attributes. There's a wonderful video you can watch called The Great Year by Walter Cruttenden, Cruttenden. The Great Year is narrated by James Earl Jones. And it's a delightful video documentary about the precession of the equinox. And it suggests that there are reasons why we are becoming more conscious. And one is, when we're in an ascending age, it's a lot like if I have a laptop computer on Wi-Fi and my router is in the far end of the house and I'm trying to get data over the internet and I'm not getting much data and it's not coming very fast. So I pick up my laptop and I walk towards the room that has the router. What happens? I get more data and it comes a lot faster. And when I get into the Mayan calendar, I'll explain a little bit more. Yes, question?
So that was going to be my question is, Patricia Kodaropoulos talks about how there's this movement happening on the planet, and everybody's going to move. It's just, but you had made the comment about if we work at it. So I'm trying to, if the planets move and it impacts us, whether we're consciously doing the work or not, it's going to impact us. So which is it? Is it going to happen no matter what?
I think it has to do with individuation. It's like the sun shines on all of us, but we absorb the light differently. We see it in different ways, and as we are all very much like beautiful fruit trees, we bear fruit differently. We grow at different speeds because of our individuation. So I think we are all bathed in this galactic light, if you like. To my example, imagine I have a little red ball and I drop it on a hard surface. So we all know what happens. It bounces not as high but faster, right? So not as high but faster. And so how that equates to where we are now is there's a lot less time between events, and each event itself is happening much more quickly. And when I get to the Mayan calendar, I'm going to address that as well. That has to do with these cycles of consciousness. So like you say, we're all exposed to the light. Our solar system is related to the galactic center by being directly in line with it. And our solar system moves through space at about 30,000 miles per hour. So our Earth is not just circling the sun like this. The Earth is moving at about 17,000 miles around the sun, but the sun is moving. So the Earth is actually going in a spiral around the sun. But the sun is also going around our Milky Way galaxy. But it's not going in a disk of the galaxy. Our solar system is going in a spiral above and below the galactic center like this, like a spring going around the galaxy. It takes about 220 million years for our solar system to make it once around the galaxy. But about every 5,000 years, the Earth lines up exactly to the galactic center. I mean, if you go down to the land of the Maya, and the very largest ball court that they have, which is symbolic of awareness and spiritual awakening, that ball court was aligned 1,000 years ago, so that on December 21st, 2012, when the sun rose in the east, that ball court would be aligned exactly with the galactic center. So we know that our solar system has been in alignment with the galactic center from 1980 to 2017, 37-year window. And we know that periodic alignments with heavenly bodies do create the transformation of consciousness, especially if it's a galactic center, right? That's a very powerful energy source to be in focus with or in alignment. And so this is why
From 1980 to when?
1980 to 2017, 37-year window.
So this is
And then we'll go out above the galaxy and then back down in this spiral.
So that seems to suggest that the Milky Way or the galaxy is connected. If it goes from the beginning to the end and it goes back to the beginning again, then it's
Yes.
circular or optical
Yes,
or
and-
oval or
And you know, you can keep going. You can say, okay, well, the galaxy itself is spinning,
right.
but the galaxy itself is moving this way too as it's spinning. So actually, the Earth is never quite in the same place ever.
So is there a place where we drop off the edge?
Absolutely.
There is a place where
Yeah.
we smack into
There's a big galactic bus stop.
Oh, they're not going as fast as we are?
No, they're actually moving toward us. So at
Oh,
some point
oh.
in the future, we'll pass through each other, which will be all fun and games, because we'll get thrown out of the galaxy
We'll
probably.
be out of whack.
We get
We
a
know-
restart, we get a reboot.
Yep,
We know
something
that,
like that, yeah.
We know that our galaxy is absorbing little bits of other galaxies, and what freaked out astronomers is they thought that because of the Big Bang, everything would be falling apart, and now we find since the 1990s that our galaxy is actually replenishing itself. Pretty amazing. Yes?
So this 37-year period is, were we in the galactic or are we moving into the galactic?
We are,
In the galactic
Like,
center.
is it over?
we are
2017?
page 5. Told you we'd skip around.
Was this the best it's gonna be? I need to know, right now.
Yeah, you gotta make your plans for the end of the year, right?
Okay.
And so if you look at this bottom right image here, this is where we are right now in alignment with the galactic center. And then we will move beyond the galactic center, but above and below the equator of the galaxy. So just think of it as we're spiraling around the galaxy, orbiting it, but our spiral is above and below, like this. And then every 5,115 years, we come into alignment. I don't mean to overwhelm you with data, but we come into alignment with the galactic center. So it means in the past 26,000 years, there's been 5 of these alignments to the galactic center. So it means in the past 26,000 years, we are only the 5th generation of humans to live in an era where there would be this alignment.
Is it kind of like a galactic summer solstice?
It's like a galactic summer. Sure, why not? Sure.
Instead of being above
It's a-
and
it's
below.
a-
Out of it now?
But I have a question about what you said before that I missed somehow.
Yeah.
You were talking about where we are in relation to the golden age. And
Yes.
first we said that it looks to me, unless I'm looking at the numbers wrong.
Page 2.
No, I'm not, I don't mean page numbers.
No, I
mean
meant
the
for them
numbers
to
of
look
the
at
years,
page 2.
the numbers of the years.
Yeah.
That we are in the Dwapara, we're in the Bronze Age right now.
Right,
It
we
looks
are
like
in
that.
Dwapara Yuga.
And it looks like we're on ascending. In other words, it's going towards
Right.
the golden age.
Look at it like you would a clock face.
Exactly.
We are rising.
Yeah.
And when I referenced the Great Year movie or documentary, there is one of the head monks of the Self-Realization Fellowship, Paramahansa Yogananda's fellowship organization. He said that as we go through these yugas, we ascend in consciousness. He said, in fact, that their teacher, Yogananda, said that in the golden age we'd be able to see God.
Right, but, right, so that's like how many thousands of years away? It's a bunch of thousands of years away before we get there, but we are, how we show up and do our work now, in my way of seeing it, is participating in getting there and opening things up for all people more. Whatever,
Yes.
the way I see it is that as we do our work, we do it not only for ourselves.
I think that's very well said.
We do it for all. And
Yes.
so those people who might not be as, whatever, there's so many people around the world who are so involved in surviving that they can't maybe be as aware or doing their work
As well
as we can. We have that responsibility and privilege, and we do it not only for ourselves but for all. But we are in a place where this can serve us and we can serve it in a way that it gets us there, gets more people there sooner. Does that make sense?
So what would explain the wobble? Why would Earth's axis wobble at all? There are stories that go back to the teachings, or the writings, I should say, of Zecharia Sitchin, who studied a lot of ancient texts, the Sumerian cuneiform, and the study of the Anunnaki and the Nephilim and the planet Nibiru, which is said to be the 10th planet,
Right.
or in some cases the 12th planet, and that it represents a huge planet, many times the size of Earth, that where most of the planets in our solar system go around the sun in what's called the plane of the ecliptic. But that Nibiru goes this way around the sun every 3,600 years. And some of the writings talk about how when Nibiru passed through our solar system, that it took one of the moons from Saturn and deposited around Earth. That Earth at one time was actually called Tiamat. It was over twice the size that it was now. And that when this Nibiru went too close, our Earth kind of tore itself apart and then canted over on an angle at 23.5 degrees. Now, in the documentary, The Great Year by Walter Cruttenden, when he talks about Yogananda's teacher, Sri Yukteswar, well, Yukteswar's teacher said, I want you to write a book that distills some of the Upanishads so we can show the Western people some of the wisdom that's contained in the Upanishads. He says, okay. So around 1894, Sri Yukteswar wrote a book called The Holy Science. And in the book, in 1894, he said, and our sun takes for its dual another star. He just said, over 100 years ago, that our sun is a binary star. A binary star. Now, modern astronomers will say that our Milky Way galaxy, the one in which we live, is 400 billion stars with a B, 400 billion. But over 60% of those are binary, and trinary, and quaternary. So think of two stars. I don't have my... if I had two little golf balls, think of two stars like this, orbiting each other like this. See how I sped up?
As you get closer.
So is that Nubia? Is that what you're speaking of?
No, they're not talking about Nibiru. They're talking about another star. So the first question is, why don't we see it? So the theory is that it could be a neutron star, which emits no light, or a magnetar, which is a star that is basically magnetic in origin, but either way very difficult to discern. But it's an interesting point because two things would happen. One is that it could account for the Earth being tilted over on its axis 23.5 degrees. But two, and more importantly, it's a lot like walking into the other room where the router is, because if you think of these two stars accelerating towards each other, you could think of the 13,000 years of acceleration in consciousness before they go in the other direction, where the little ball is bouncing much, much faster and the time between events is much, much shorter. It's trippy stuff. Yes?
Does the reversal of the magnetic poles of Earth have anything to do with it?
The question was, does the reversal of the magnetic poles have anything to do with it? I think it does, but I don't know what that would be. Because from my readings, we've taken many, many core samples, and we have established the fact that we have had pole reversals where the magnetic poles have shifted on the planet, that it hasn't been once, that it's been many times. and that according to scientists that we're due. But there's also thoughts that our wobble would indeed become even more eccentric. Now, one thing has happened is that there are, you're familiar with airports that put the numbers on the runway, and you're familiar with if it's 270 degrees, that's due west, so the runway says 27, runway 27, okay? Like San Francisco Airport is runway 27 or 26. Anyway, the point is they've had to renumber some of the runways because the magnetic pull of the Earth has shifted enough to where the runways always run on magnetic headings. So if you're flying an aircraft and they say land on runway 26, but it's really 24, you'd miss the runway. So there is data that says that our magnetic pull has now shifted somewhere down into northern Canada.
Yeah, I do some or I did before I was breaking my ankle, but anyway, the declination on the maps, when you go by a map at REI,
The declinations,
it'll, it'll say a different number from year to year.
Yeah, yeah. And isn't it true that the magnetic force or something it's not as much, it's less than it was, the magnetic pull?
Yes, let me answer that. Greg Braden brought that forth years ago about how on the planet there are always areas of greater and lesser magnetic activity. I mean that's normal, but that the overall the general level of the magnetic field has been decreasing.
Yeah.
However, there's also, I mean, going back to the days of Chocho Imamoto in the early 1990s and the photon field that we were beginning to fly through, science now talks about these magnetic bubbles that are bigger than our solar system that have intense magnetic fields that we're flying through that. So there's a whole bunch of information out there that kind of gets to the point like, well, okay, what do you follow? You know, what does it all mean?
But
and
how does it affect us is the most important thing for me. It's like, what do we know is one thing, and the other thing is, how do all of these different forces affect us in terms of the chaos in the world and around us?
We do know scientifically that when a magnetic field is applied over certain areas of the brain, that your mental acuity, your memory, your psychic abilities increases hundreds and hundreds of % for up to 36 hours. So we know we've done that. We are doing that.
Affects your sleep cycles and stuff like that.
It would disturb your sleep cycles.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, I thought you had another question. Yeah, Jim.
One thing that would affect us when the magnetic pole switches is that if during the switch there's a time when we have no net magnetic field on the Earth, then we're in some danger from the solar rays, the solar wind.
Oh, yeah.
Stripping
rays.
stripping off part of our atmosphere. Mm-hmm. That's why Mars has such a small atmospheres, because it's solidified right to the core, which means it no longer has a magnetic field. We have to have the liquid core in order to generate the magnetic field. And Mars no longer has one, which means that there's nothing protecting its atmosphere from the solar wind, so it tends to get stripped off.
Yeah.
So at least one component of it is the fact that we still have a molten core.
There is a scientific experiment with a chamber they call the Mu chamber, and when a person sits inside this chamber, they remove the effect of Earth's magnetic field. And within less than 20 minutes, every person that's ever sat in that chamber begins to weep because they're not in Mother Earth's magnetic field. So this presents a problem, because when I think about sending astronauts, men and women, to Mars in a little spacecraft, and they're away from Earth's influence, do you artificially duplicate that magnetic field in your spacecraft, or do you put it in the spacesuit or something like that? So yeah, there's a lot that goes into it. So the essence of the reason I wanted to talk about this is because it goes together with the era. As April said, we're all exposed to this change, this shift. And if you take the spiritual look at it, we've deliberately incarnated in an era of massive changes in consciousness. And if you take that one more step, we've deliberately become ministers to help promulgate or teach what those changes represent and why the ball is bouncing much faster and why it takes much less time between events for things to happen, and why things like cell phones exist now. And like I said during the sermon, you know, it was only about 150 years ago we started to translate ancient texts into more common languages where they could be readily available, and now here we have the ability to bring all these texts right to us wherever we may be. I mean, you look at, who is it, Facebook or Google is creating these aircraft that'll stay aloft for months and bring the internet to any country. Now, they've just did a test flight this last week, a successful test flight at 3,000 feet, but they hope to have these...
I think it's Google.
Google, but they hope to have these craft flying on solar power at 60,000 feet, so that anybody could have internet anywhere on the planet. And I think those cell towers are going to go away. And to me, looking at it spiritually is a way for the global human conscious to become more and more and more unified as we go into Dwapara Yuga, the electrical age, the age where we're supposed to be aware of the subtle forces of the universe. But this is the cool part, is that both science and religion or spirituality have the same goal, is to explain how our universe works, our part in it, who are we, what do we represent, what is it to be conscious, what is it to be awake. So if you look at this and you see all of the signs of the zodiac, you know, when I look at things like the painting of the Last Supper, I look at that and I think, okay, well maybe Jesus represents the sun and the 12 apostles represent the 12 signs of the zodiac. Maybe it's not just Jesus the man, maybe it's the principle of understanding the era and the age in which we live, right? The Piscean age, now moving towards the Aquarius age, where we become aware of the truth of our being, that we really are spirits who also have a physical presence. Yeah, Courtney?
So I was wondering, do we know when which era Atlantis and Mu were destroyed?
My sense of it, from everything I've read, is approximately 12,500 years ago was the era of Atlantis.
Okay, and that would have been in which, it would have been the not in the electrical time, but
No.
I'm just wondering where they were in their evolution.
It would be probably, I want to say, Virgo.
It was on the.
So are we gonna be like opposite that
Virgo or Leo.
pretty soon?
No, we are opposite that right now by being,
I just wonder what chance we have of being destroyed.
well, you know, but
I feel
see,
pretty destroyed, yeah.
I think part of the emphasis is that in every age is the opportunity for awakening. But certain age are what are called propitious or advantageous to awaken, because everything is facilitating that awakening. Like you can come to CCL, and there are an abundance of teachers from many disciplines who can teach many things about spirituality. So there's this cornucopia of wisdom that's now available, whereas if this was 100 years ago and you said, I want to learn about the Tibetans, fine, there's a steamship, because we don't have airplanes yet, and take those mules, and it will take you about a month to get there, and then you go study with the Tibetans. Now, you want to do that, it might be a phone call or a live streaming event that you are bringing to yourself, because you've chosen to live in an era where it's not necessary to take long journeys, but to gather the information much more instantly. Does any of you remember the days that if you wanted to listen to more music, you had to pick the record up and do this? If you wanted to hear the other side? The daughter of one of my friends just posted on Facebook, do you realize there was a time where we actually had to be home to answer the phone?
Yeah. Yep.
And you know, most of us in this room say, well, yeah. But you talk to a 9-year-old, they look at you like,
What?
why would you
Why?
do that? Why would you do that?
I had a friend whose child was born during a time of drought, and he was in grades. No, he was in nursery preschool, the first time he saw rain. And he was amazed. He didn't know what it was. He thought somebody was trying to wash the car. He's like, what are they doing? Who's putting water on the car?
What's the name of that book? The Last Child in the Woods? It's a very good book. It's about how when we were children, we had a radius that we played that might be 9 blocks, and the average child today has a radius of maybe 1 block, that we don't go out into the woods, we don't go out into nature like we used to. Last Child in the Woods, I think is the name of the book. Very fine work. Tells us about how we're kind of losing track a little bit about being in nature. Would you make copies? Thank you very much. Yes.
I need to clear something up.
Yeah.
You were saying
Yeah.
that when we're looking at the precession of the astrological signs,
Yeah.
we're looking across the diagram.
Right.
So on page 2, we're looking across to the age of Aquarius. Does that mean that we are in the Bronze Age, or that we are in the Golden Age that's near the age of Aquarius?
We are right here.
Bronze Age.
Okay, Bronze Age.
We're in the Bronze Age according to the Greeks. We are going into Aquarius according to the astrologers.
Right.
And we're in Dwapara Yuga according to the Indian culture.
Okay.
So this is just 3 cultural ways of
Okay.
looking at the same 26,000 year
But
cycle.
we're in a time of ascension.
Oh, yes.
That means
Yes,
we
we
are
are on the
ascension.
up. We are on the upswing.
Yeah, yes. I'm just checking the time.
Okay.
Oh, I'd like to, we were
Yes.
talking about what we know and don't know,
Yeah.
and what we experienced and did not experience. Like, I'm from the KoolAid generation, right? And,
Me too.
there's a lot to be said for great KoolAid, I just know. Personal
Right.
experience, because I would have to go to the store about 2 miles to buy a package for a nickel.
Yep.
Then I had to walk home, past all the mean kids and the mean dogs. Yes,
Who might have wanted your KoolAid too.
they just wanted to be mean. I'm telling you, yeah, they did want KoolAid. And then I would go home, I would pump the water, I'd get the gallon jug, I'd make the KoolAid. That was my job. So, I'm talking to a friend who tells me she teaches, she works with small children, somewhere around 5, 6, 7. And she mentioned KoolAid, and they didn't know what she was talking about. They had no concept of KoolAid, none whatsoever. But all those other new things out there, they would have known.
Yes.
So this is all about what we have moved from and what we're going into, and how I see it.
Brilliant.
We've
Yes.
been, yeah.
Yeah,
And so it's
brilliant.
really kind of interesting, because this new generation, they are just in all the new things. They're 9 years old, 10 years old, and they don't really have a concept of what it really means to do some of the things we did, like you would go play for miles.
Yes.
It wa-
Run
you know,
down the
miles.
canyons and yeah.
Yes, and you weren't afraid.
Or in early 2000, when I went into a Toys R Us looking for a slinky to demonstrate for healers training what happens up and down your spine as far as energy, and I went into Toys R Us and they said, "A what?"
Uh-huh.
They said a slinky, you know, a little metal thing and go like this. They said, I don't know. I had to find it myself.
For sale at Cracker Barrel. Seriously, I bought one. But what I like is the people most of the people in this room. You know, I was talking to somebody and they said, wasn't it amazing when you didn't have to do the dial on the phone?
I know.
And I said,
Yes.
no, what was amazing was when I had to use a crank.
A crank on the phone.
And
Yeah.
my ring was 2 longs and 1 short. I
Yep.
can still
Yep.
remember that, you know?
Yeah.
And they looked and they said, what did you crank?
Or watching those movies where the detective is chasing the bad guys and he has to call in, so he has to stop at the gas station, open the door, take the phone off the hook and go right? We watch that now and
You
go,
gotta drop your dime.
how do we ever do that?
Yes,
Bart.
Richard,
That place
the thing
call
too
with
is
the
that
cords and
the kids who are coming in now,
and operating.
Yeah.
the children that are
Yes.
being born now, are born with different ability to
Yes.
pick up on these things right away. They learn
Yes.
them really quickly, whereas we couldn't have. It was there, but we
Right,
didn't get it
right.
back then.
But at the same time, they're asking really tough questions that we have to be able to address. So that's why when a 20-year-old comes to you and says, well, talk to me about spirituality, I've read all the books and I understand the chakras and I understand the science, what can you tell me about it? So nothing's going to take the place of your own personal wisdom and experience. And that's why you can have all the machines in the world tell you,
Right.
but that's where this age of awareness comes in, where we have the ability to convey this awareness from one person to another, people who are asking critical questions that really need to be answered. I mean, I've been lecturing about the Maya since 1992, and on page 5, when you look at this little square right here, what it's saying is that our solar system, as it spins, is not spinning in the same plane as the galaxy. That our solar system is tilted 60 degrees to the spin of the galaxy. And that every 5,115 years, that forms this, what they call the Great Crossing, or they call it the mariposa, the galactic butterfly. That crossing is where that perfect alignment to the galactic center takes place that induces the transformation of consciousness. But if I said, how many of you knew that our solar system was off 60 degrees to the center of the galaxy, and that crossing would create the possibility for a transformation of consciousness due to its alignment? Okay, so remember what I said in the sermon? Conscious, co-creative collaboration. This is us working together because this is a sign of the Dwapara Yuga that we're supposed to know this. So the fact that I'm here today in this room saying these words about this information is a collaboration of all of us in this room. Even if you thought, oh, it sounds like a good lecture, maybe I'll go see that. But 95% of all communication is not verbal or physical. 95% is consciousness, vibrations, energy, frequency. That's what's really going on in this room. So what happens is when you learn this, when you start to apply this, you represent this. So then somebody comes to you and says, what was that lecture like? Well, maybe you don't remember all the details, but your vibration held what you needed today. And then you send that to the next person, and they send that to the next person. Now, how many of you have ever seen or been to the Yucatan and seen, okay, this is the Cosmic University of the Maya, the Pyramid of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza. Kukulkan is also called Quetzalcoatl, which is the half serpent, half quetzal bird. Quetzal bird is a national bird of Guatemala. And so the reason why it's serpent, which is also, serpent doesn't mean snake, serpent means wisdom, but it's a representation of the Kundalini energy, the quetzal bird and the serpent of the awakening. And so on the pyramid, there is a carved head of a serpent down here that sits there forever. And that every equinox, at morning and afternoon, the sun will shine over these 9 levels of the pyramid and create these 7 light images. Can you see those 7 light images?
Yep.
That's the serpent. But remember, in between the light images are the dark images. So 7 light and 6 dark. 7 days and 6 nights. Or 7 plus 6 equals 13, and 13 is the cosmic representation of the 13 articulations of the human body. 2 ankles, 2 knees, 2 hips, 2 wrists, 2 elbows, 2 shoulders, and your neck. 13. It's a very sacred number. That's one of the reasons why some people remove 13 as a good number. We don't have a 13th floor, or it's a bad number. That's wrong. That's entirely wrong. So this represents the return of Kukulkan as uniting heaven and earth. It isn't just the serpent of wisdom coming to earth. It's not heaven on earth. It's the serpent of the divine wisdom uniting heaven and earth. So imagine you have an older Toltec temple pyramid under this one, and you're a Mayan and says, well, I'm going to create a pyramid with 9 levels, and I'm going to orient it so that at the solstice and equinoxes, it does this thing with the sun. How would you know that? 1,000 years ago, no computers, no cell phones, no cell towers, no calculators. How would you know?
The beings from outer planets came and told you.
That could be. No, that could be. That could be. It explains a lot about different civilizations and about extraterrestrials, meaning not terrestrially originated beings, coming and assisting to help humanity in its own inner transformation. Now, what this also tells you is that you and I have had lifetimes thousands of years ago in ascended states of consciousness, which would beg the question, well, Dr. J, if we had lifetimes in ascended states, what's going on now? And it's a process called recapitulation. It means you are reclaiming that victory over illusion by choosing to incarnate in an age where you can rapidly accelerate your own spiritual growth. Because the possibility to accelerate now in this galactic alignment is huge. And all we have to do is show up and apply. Open our hearts, be authentic, and the rest is happening. So this light and dark pattern represents the uniting of heaven and earth, which is symbolic for spirit and body. Yes, please.
I think the idea that God came to ascended to the earth and come down and all that. When you stand in Chichen at sunrise and sunset, I can't remember what it was exactly. These stairs actually light and darken.
Yes.
And they go up. So whereas it lightens going down, it lightens going up.
Oh.
It loses light going up.
Mm-hmm.
So this is where the idea of the very widespread notion that it is representing, divine, whatever energies coming down to earth and going back.
It's very compelling. On the equinox in March, there'll be 50,000 people here. And I've been there several times. I was there the day after the equinox in 2012, and there were about 3,000 to 5,000 people there. But still the pattern was just exactly as you see it here in this picture. And again, this has to do with cycles and rhythms of time and consciousness. And so as you start to understand, hey, astrology is real, numerology is real, vibration, sense, perception is real, that we really do live in an age where it's possible to awaken spiritually and take advantage of it. Saying, hey, have you ever read your astrology? Today is a really good day to, and you go, yeah, I'll surf that wave. So when you're on a surfboard, what's the main thing you have to do?
Get up, baby.
You have to balance, right? But you can use the power of the wave to do what? Take you forward. And so the more we stay in balance with these exigencies, these emergencies of these energies that are happening nowadays, the more we're carried forward. And what's difficult to do sometimes? Stay in balance. Sometimes it's very difficult. So,
Richard,
yes.
Being a spiritualist church, when I was in Koba, which is right down the trail.
You went to Koba?
Uh-huh.
Oh, really?
Chichen Itza.
Yeah, I've been there.
Corky was waving from the top of this pyramid. She climbed every pyramid she could get her.
That I believe.
Yeah.
Yep.
But in
She climbed every
Koba, we were
pyramid.
walking along and they were saying that there used to be this village. And so I asked my spirit guide, Ma, what was this village? He said, I don't know, I was never here, I'll get you somebody. And so all of a sudden I got this guy that was very, very tall and dressed all in white, and he was kind of like walking along, and I'm telling Corky and Helen what I'm seeing, and he said, they were white, and I said, what? And he said, all the buildings were white. And I said, were they made of paint? And he said, no. I said, what, were they painted? He said, no. I said, were they made of concrete? And he said, well, and I said, so why were they white? And he said, well, I don't know the word. I was talking to a guy who doesn't know the word. And I said, limestone, and he said, yes.
Yeah.
And so I said, okay. So when we went to the museum in Cancun, and they have this archaeological museum,
Yeah.
and I saw my man.
Oh.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
he was,
He said there were the tall men, and he said there's the tall people and the little people. So I said, what happened to the people? And he said the little bitty bug bit them, and they ran into the water.
Wow. Little bug bit them and they ran into the water.
Yeah,
Well,
otherwise why they can't find their bones is because that's what happened.
yeah, well, the Maya didn't have those ritual killings like the Aztecs did,
Right.
because there's no bones there in the cenotes. And, the Yucatan is flat, and it's mostly limestone, and there's about 3,000. A cenote is like a hole in the ground with fresh water coming up, and there's about 3,000 cenotes in the Yucatan. Interestingly enough, right next to Chichen Itza is a place called Ik-Il, a place where the sacred wind blows, and it's a huge cenote that you can swim in. I've been in it several times, and it's about 400 feet deep.
It's very cold.
But it refreshes itself. Every night at 11 o'clock, there's this upwelling of fresh water that it purifies itself, just like a living, breathing being. But most of the Yucatan, not only is it flat with no mountains, but it's mostly limestone.
Yeah.
Mostly limestone.
Have you been to the top of the pyramids?
Yes.
Where you can see the top of the trees. The trees
Yes.
are flat on top.
Yes, I've been
You
to the
can
top.
see where the earth been.
I went into the top of the pyramid at Chichen Itza.
Oh, that's so cool, where the jade jaguar.
We did a half-hour Mayan ceremony in there, and the pyramid is built over a vortex which warps space and time, and they have 4 huge beams holding up this stone ceiling, and one of the beams was replaced. So you think, well, why weren't the other 3 beams replaced? If it's in a jungle, it's always humid, and it's because in a vortex it warps space and time. So you look at this page here. This is page 4 of 9. Looks like this. And if you look at the image on your left, this is the original calendario Azteca, the Aztec calendar. It's not a Mayan calendar, it's Aztec. And can you see 4 squares here? You see where I'm pointing? Can you see those?
Yeah.
Those are called suns.
S-U-N or S-O-N?
S-U-N. But it doesn't mean the sun as much as it means era, E-R-A, eras of time. And there are 4 suns, or 4 5,115-year periods of time, which is about 20,000 years. And look at the dude in the middle. That's the 5th sun. And can you see he has his tongue out like this? Whenever you see a Mayan or an Aztec image, whether it's a painting or a stonework, and they're like this, that means listen up. This is really important. Listen up. And so this is a representation of the 5th sun, or more accurately, the ending of the 5th sun at December 21st, 2012, which would be, as the Mayans would say, we are entering into the 6th sun now. So when you see our own calendar at December 31st midnight, what happens? It's January. Calendar doesn't stop. Your watch, you know, when it ticks like this, if you have an analog watch, you know, it just keeps going, right? So this is an Aztec calendar that a lot of people put on their Mayan teachings, but it's not Mayan. It's Aztec. But it does say that this is about the 5th sun that will end, did end. Did you guys miss the end of the world, the apocalypse?
No, we were.
December 21st, 2012, did you?
Yeah, slept right through it, yeah.
I always miss those cataclysms.
Yeah.
So,
The computer just kept on working.
so you look at the one on the right, which is a very popular image that's used to depict the Mayan calendar, but this also is not the Mayan calendar. It is an image of a Mayan priest holding up one of the day signs called Ahau, A-H-A-U, Ahau. Kanisha Ahau is the most powerful, most sacred energy to the Maya. And so the reason this is depicted the way it is that the priest symbolically picks up the sun and walks around all of the other day signs in a 5,115-year cycle, and he sets it down and he picks it up again immediately and just keeps on going. It's an endless cycle. It's a way of saying there's actually an endless number of 2012s, or an endless number of Yugas, or an endless number of ages. And that's the conundrum, is when a spiritual person says, well, you know, there's no space or time, and you say that to the average person, they look at you like, sure, what are you talking about? So there's a video that I'm in, I forget the name of it. I'll see if I can find it. And we had in this video the last remaining royalty of the Maya, one of the last kings of the Maya, was being interviewed. And he was speaking in Spanish, and of course you could get the subtitle, and he's talking about how this image is really just symbolic of how the actual 5,115 year cycle of a sun or an arrow works, that he immediately picks it up again. And so what are you left with? Well, where is the Mayan calendar? Well, in the 16th century, when the Spaniards came to the land of the Maya, they burned many, many books. And they took what are called codices. A codex is like a primer. It's like what you use. You study this and it explains all of that. So you'd use a codex to explain all these symbols on the pyramid. So they took these codexes, which were like leaved paper that would expand. Some of the codexes, each panel would be like about 4 by 10 inches, and then it would be put together like this, like an accordion, would be 5 meters wide. And they took one to Dresden, one to Madrid, and one to Paris. So some of them are called the Paris Codex, the Dresden Codex, right? The Madrid Codex. Well, what the Spaniards didn't know is that because they took them back to Europe and put them in a museum, they were preserved for 400 years, so that there would come a time when our archaeologists would say, now wait a minute, there's codexes there. Let's start using those to figure out what these Mayans were really all about. Oh, they weren't really sacrificing people. Oh, this is a calendar. Oh, and it's not this calendar. It's a calendar that's derived about space and time. The Mayan calendars are the only calendars we know of that tells you when a certain consciousness is supposed to show up. Going back, the longest Mayan calendar is 16.4 billion years with a B. 16.4 billion years. So I put a little bit of that, and I'm sorry this is very hard to read, on page 6 of your handout, that talks about these rhythms and these cycles of time. If you'd like a really easy read, a woman by the name of Barbara Hand Clow, C-L-O-W, wrote a book called The Mayan Code. And what she did is she synthesized the teachings of John Major Jenkins, Johann Kalaman, David Pinchbeck, and others into an easy-to-read format that you could say, okay, here's what these authors had to say, and this is why the Mayans did what they did. Well, interestingly enough, she put a little chart in there, and on one side of the chart was when science said certain things were supposed to show up. Earth was formed. First amoeba, or single-celled being, came into life. First reptiles, Cro-Magnon, Homo sapiens. And then on the left, she put the Mayan calendars in there. And it matches very closely in that these calendars are telling you when a certain consciousness is supposed to show up. It's amazing. It's amazing.
That was the Mayan code?
Codex. The Mayan Codex. Oh, the book? The book is
Yeah.
called The Mayan Code, C-O-D-E,
Okay.
by Barbara Hand Clow.
How do you spell her last name?
C-L-O-W. C-L-O-W. Clow. Very easy to get. I think it's the 10th book that she wrote. I think she started out writing about the Arcturians, didn't she? Yeah. So anyhow, if you look at this page and you just simply count the number of columns, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It actually has 10 time cycles, but there's actually 9 calendars that have to do with consciousness. Now, if you look at the pyramid at Chichen Itza, how many levels did it have? 9. If you go to Tikal in the Petén Reserve of Guatemala, 9. There's other pyramids in the Yucatan area that have these 9 levels to them. And as you remember, I told you a little bit about how the sun, when it shines at the equinox over the level of these nine steps, create the 7 levels of light and dark. the 9 levels on the pyramid represent the 9 underworlds of creation. Now, the Mayans were really cool with calendars. They had a planting calendar. They had another calendar called, a consciousness calendar called the Tzolkin, Tzolkin. It was a 260-day Tzolkin related to what is called a 13-20 interval. And it was also, there's a lot of alignments there. 260 days is the average gestation period for a baby. But it's also, the 260 has a lot to do with the Pleiades as well. So there's a whole bunch of other things that these numbers and rhythms have to do. And in the Tzolkin, it has the 20 day signs that I showed you that the priest was carrying, and also what are called 13 tones or frequencies. And every day is a tone and a frequency. So you can easily go onto a website called Mayan Magics, MAYANMAJIX. Used to be run by Ian Lungold, who passed away, and you could look up today's energy according to the Mayan calendar. You could go back to Jose Arguelles' teachings and look up that energy. Anyway, point being is that here was a culture who had achieved a form of awareness that I call waveform consciousness. It means they had awakened so much that they knew where and when in space-time a certain consciousness should show up on the planet. And the reason why it took the shape of a step instead of a ramp is that they said the consciousness would just show up, just like that. So when it was time for the reptiles to show up, they show up. When it was time for Cro-Magnon to show up. When it was time. So now in this era of 2012 is time for an ascension process. And the word process means ongoing. It doesn't mean just all of a sudden that I come in and I'm already awakened, but I can take advantage of the energies that are available to me here in this era of global transformation, the inner transformation of consciousness.
Okay, let me move the page here.
What language is that? Well, while we're reorienting, I want to ask a question about
You
Maya.
go ahead.